Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Illusion. Frederick "Rick" Frazier had built what many would consider the perfect life. At 34, the former Marine gunnery sergeant commanded respect in his small Ohio town of Millbrook. His security consulting firm, Sentinel Solutions, specialized in high-end residential and corporate protection, drawing clients from 3 states. Rick's military precision and tactical expertise had earned him a reputation as the man to call when safety mattered most. His wife of 12 years, Molly Frazier, was Millbrook's golden girl. At 31, she ran the town's most successful real estate agency, inheriting both the business and her late father's political connections. Her auburn hair and emerald eyes had caught Rick's attention during his first week back from his final deployment, but it was her sharp business acumen that sealed their partnership. Together, they owned the sprawling Frazier estate on the hill overlooking the town, a testament to their combined success. Their daughter, 8-year-old Hannah Frazier, was the light of Rick's world. Sharp as her mother, but with her father's tactical mind, she'd already mastered chess and showed an uncanny ability to read people's intentions. Rick often joked that Hannah would either become a general or rule the world, possibly both. But perfection, Rick had learned in the Marines, was often the calm before the storm. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in October. Rick returned from a 3-day security consultation in Columbus to find Molly on the phone, her voice unusually soft and filled with laughter he hadn't heard in months. She quickly ended the call when she saw him, claiming it was a client discussing a difficult property sale. Margaret Stewart's divorce is getting messy, Molly explained, not meeting his eyes. Her husband's fighting for the lake house. Rick's combat-honed instincts whispered warnings, but he pushed them aside. Marriage wasn't a battlefield, and paranoia was a luxury he couldn't afford in civilian life. Or so he thought. The second crack came 3 weeks later during Hannah's school play. Rick scanned the audience, a habit from his military days, when he spotted Molly texting furiously. Her fingers flew across the screen with an urgency that made his jaw tighten. When she noticed his stare, she quickly pocketed the phone. "Sorry, honey. Emergency with the Patterson listing," she whispered. But Rick had seen the contact name before she closed the phone. Officer Terry. His blood chilled. Terry Snyder, Millbrook's golden boy cop, divorced 2 years ago, and Molly's high school boyfriend before Rick entered the picture. The third crack shattered everything. Rick's security business required him to maintain relationships with local law enforcement. Detective Sam Carney, his oldest friend in the department, invited him for their monthly poker game at Murphy's Bar. The conversation flowed as freely as the whiskey until Sam's partner, Detective Will Bonner, made an offhand comment that stopped Rick's heart. "Terry's been walking on air lately," Will chuckled, dealing another hand. "Man's got a spring in his step like he's getting laid regular-like. Lucky bastard finally found someone willing to put up with his badge bunny complex." The room fell silent. Sam shot Will a warning look, but the damage was done. Rick's poker face, perfected through years of military interrogations, didn't crack, but inside, a cold fury began to build. Badge bunny complex. Terry's reputation for pursuing married women was an open secret in the department, though no one spoke about it directly. Terry always did like his conquests, Rick said carefully, his voice steady as granite. Some habits die hard. The game continued, but Rick's mind was elsewhere, cataloging every late-night Molly claimed to be showing houses, every canceled dinner due to difficult clients, every time she'd emerge from the shower smelling like unfamiliar cologne. He excused himself early, claiming fatigue from his latest consultation. But instead of heading home, Rick drove to his secondary office, a nondescript building downtown that housed his more specialized equipment. Hidden behind the legitimate security business was Rick's true expertise, intelligence gathering and tactical operations. His military record was spotless, but his methods in civilian life operated in grayer areas. Rick activated his surveillance system, cross-referencing phone records, credit card transactions, and GPS data. Within hours, the picture became devastatingly clear. hotel charges during his business trips, deleted text messages recovered from phone backups, GPS coordinates showing Molly's car at Terry's apartment during school hours. The evidence painted a picture of betrayal spanning 6 months. But what cut deepest was the recording he found on Molly's cloud storage, a conversation between her and Terry discussing their future plans. Rick's getting suspicious. Molly's voice whispered through his speakers. Maybe we should slow down. Relax, baby, Terry's voice responded. Your husband's a jarhead. All muscle, no brains. He'll never figure it out. And even if he does, what's he gonna do? I'm the law in this town. Rick's hands slowly clenched into fists as Terry continued. Besides, once we're married, Hannah will have a real father. Someone who can teach her respect for authority instead of that military bullshit. The recording ended, but Rick sat in the darkness for another hour, his mind working through scenarios with mechanical precision. In the Marines, betrayal was met with swift justice. In civilian life, the rules were different, but the stakes were higher. He wouldn't just expose them. He wouldn't simply divorce Molly and move on. Terry Snyder had made a fatal mistake by threatening Hannah's future and mocking Rick's service. In the Corps, they had a saying, no mercy for traitors. Rick Frazier was about to remind Millbrook why Marines were feared. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception. Rick spent the following 3 weeks becoming a ghost in his own life. To Molly and Hannah, he appeared unchanged, still the devoted husband and father, still managing his security business with military efficiency. But beneath the surface, Rick was conducting the most important reconnaissance mission of his life. His investigation revealed that Terry Snyder wasn't just sleeping with his wife. The corrupt cop had been laying groundwork for something far more sinister. Terry's personnel file, accessed through Rick's law enforcement contacts, showed a pattern of suspicious arrests, evidence-tampering allegations that never quite stuck, and a disturbing number of domestic violence calls to his apartment that somehow disappeared from the system. But it was Terry's financial records that painted the most revealing picture. For a small-town police officer making $52,000 annually, Terry lived remarkably well. His apartment was upscale, his truck was brand new, and his credit card statement showed expensive dinners and weekend getaways that should have been impossible on his salary. Rick's military contacts proved invaluable. His former squad leader, now working private security in Chicago, helped him trace Terry's extra income to a network of corrupt cops running protection for local drug dealers. Terry wasn't just unfaithful. He was dirty, using his badge to intimidate witnesses and plant evidence on anyone who threatened his operation. Your boy's got friends in high places, Jeremiah Stewart, Rick's contact, explained during a secure phone call. Word is he's been feeding information to the Bassett crime family. They've got judges, prosecutors, even some feds on payroll. The revelation made Rick's blood run cold. Molly wasn't just cheating. She was unknowingly involved with organized crime. Worse, Terry's plan became crystal clear. Eliminate Rick, marry Molly for her political connections and real estate business, and use the Frazier family fortune to expand his criminal enterprise. Rick's surveillance of Molly revealed the depth of her betrayal. She wasn't just having an affair. She was actively planning his destruction. Hidden cameras in their home captured conversations between Molly and her sister, Dawn Nixon, where they discussed Terry's solution to the Rick problem. Terry says once Rick's out of the picture, everything will be so much easier. Molly confided to Dawn over wine in their kitchen. Rick's business connections, his military contacts, Terry can use all of it. And Hannah will finally have a father who's not damaged by war. Dawn, always the practical sister, raised concerns. But what if Rick finds out? You know what they say about his temper. Molly laughed, a sound that once filled Rick with joy but now cut like a blade. Terry's got it handled. He says there are ways to neutralize threats permanently. Police work has its benefits. Rick realized he was walking into a trap designed to either destroy his reputation or end his life. Terry wasn't just stealing his wife. He was planning to frame him for crimes that would send him to prison or worse. The corrupt cop had resources, connections, and the backing of organized crime. But Rick had something Terry underestimated: the tactical genius that made him one of the most decorated non-commissioned officers in Marine Corps history. He began building his own network. His security business provided legitimate cover to recruit assets. Former military personnel now working in law enforcement, private security, and government agencies. These weren't corrupt officials. They were patriots who understood the difference between justice and the law. Oliver Farrell, a former Navy SEAL now working for the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, became Rick's inside man. Oliver had been tracking the Bassett family's police corruption for 2 years, but lacked the evidence needed for prosecution. Terry Snyder's a small fish, Oliver explained during a clandestine meeting in a Columbus parking garage. But he's connected to bigger problems. If we can flip him, we can take down the entire network. I'm not interested in flipping him, Rick replied coldly. I want him destroyed. Oliver studied Rick's face and saw something that made him take a step back. Jesus, Rick, I know they hurt you, but don't do anything stupid. These people are dangerous. So am I. Rick's plan began taking shape. He wouldn't just expose Terry and Molly. He would manipulate them into destroying themselves. Every move would be calculated, every consequence anticipated. He would use their own corruption against them, turning their weapons into instruments of their downfall. The first phase involved misdirection. Rick began deliberately leaving trails of evidence for Terry to find, making himself appear vulnerable and unaware. He staged phone conversations where Terry's surveillance devices would pick up discussions about valuable assets, overseas accounts, and business vulnerabilities that didn't actually exist. Meanwhile, Rick documented everything. Every meeting between Molly and Terry. Every criminal transaction Terry facilitated. Every piece of evidence that would eventually bury them both. Hannah remained oblivious to the storm brewing around her, but Rick noticed her quiet intelligence had picked up on tensions. She began asking pointed questions about Mommy's late-night phone calls and Daddy's frequent business trips. Daddy, Hannah said one evening as Rick tucked her into bed, are you and Mommy fighting? Rick's heart clenched. His daughter deserved better than the destruction about to unfold, but she also deserved the truth about who her mother really was. Sometimes adults have disagreements, sweetheart, he said carefully. But no matter what happens, you'll always be safe. Daddy promises. Hannah's green eyes, so much like her mother's, studied his face with unsettling intensity. Are the bad people trying to hurt us? The question stopped Rick cold. Hannah had inherited more than Molly's looks. She had Rick's tactical instincts. Somehow, his 8-year-old daughter sensed the danger better than the adults around her. No one will ever hurt you, Rick promised and meant it. Whatever was coming, Hannah would be protected. As November turned to December, Rick's investigation revealed the final piece of Terry's plan. The corrupt cop intended to frame Rick for drug possession during a traffic stop, using planted evidence and manufactured witness statements. The scheme would destroy Rick's security clearance, end his business, and send him to prison where Terry's criminal contacts would ensure he never came home. But Terry had made one crucial error. He'd underestimated the man he was trying to destroy. Rick Frazier had survived 3 combat deployments, earned 2 Bronze Stars, and commanded Marines in some of the most dangerous operations in modern military history. He'd faced enemies who understood warfare, honor, and the costs of battle. Terry Snyder was about to learn that there were fates worse than death, and Rick knew how to deliver them all. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. December brought an early snow to Millbrook, blanketing the town in deceptive beauty. Rick used the weather to his advantage, knowing that winter conditions would limit escape routes and force his enemies into predictable patterns. His surveillance showed that Terry planned to execute his frame-up before Christmas, likely during one of Rick's scheduled business trips. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Rick received a call from a potential client in Cincinnati, a wealthy businessman requiring a comprehensive security assessment for his estate. The timing was perfect, 3 days away from Millbrook, giving Terry ample opportunity to plant evidence and prepare his trap. I'll miss you, Molly said as Rick packed his overnight bag, her performance Oscar-worthy. She even managed tears as she kissed him goodbye. Drive safely, honey. Rick pulled out of their driveway, knowing he would never return as the same man. By the time he came back, everyone in Millbrook would understand exactly who Frederick Frazier really was. But Rick never made it to Cincinnati. Instead, he drove to a safe house Oliver Farrell had arranged, a cabin 40 miles north of Millbrook where Rick could monitor Terry's activities without being detected. His surveillance network was now fully operational. Hidden cameras in his house, GPS trackers on Molly's car, and audio surveillance of Terry's apartment and patrol vehicle. The drama unfolded exactly as Rick anticipated. Within hours of his departure, Molly called Terry. "He's gone. You have 3 days." Terry's response chilled Rick's blood. "Baby, by the time I'm done, your husband will be facing 20 years minimum. And the best part? He'll never see it coming." That evening, Rick watched through his hidden cameras as Terry entered his house using a key Molly had provided. The corrupt cop moved through Rick's home like he owned it, touching Molly's belongings with possessive familiarity that made Rick's jaw clench. But it was Terry's interaction with Hannah that pushed Rick past the point of no return. "Hey there, sweetheart," Terry said, approaching Hannah as she did homework at the kitchen table. "How would you like to have a new daddy?" Hannah, wise beyond her years, looked up with suspicious eyes. "I already have a daddy." "Well, sometimes things change," Terry replied, his voice taking on an edge. "Sometimes bad daddies have to go away, and good daddies take their place." "My daddy's not bad," Hannah said firmly. "He protects people." Terry's laugh was cruel. "Your daddy's about to learn what happens to people who don't respect the law." Rick's hands trembled with rage as he watched Terry ruffle his daughter's hair with mock affection. The corrupt cop had just signed his own death warrant. The next morning, Terry began his operation. Rick watched through traffic cameras as the cop positioned himself along Route 7, the main highway leading back from Cincinnati. Terry had called in favors to ensure he'd be the responding officer to any traffic stops in that area, and he prepared a bag of cocaine specifically for planting in Rick's vehicle. But Rick wasn't coming from Cincinnati. Instead, he was 15 minutes away, watching Terry's every move through multiple surveillance feeds. Oliver Farrell's FBI task force was positioned discreetly throughout the area, recording everything. This wasn't just about destroying Terry. It was about dismantling the entire corruption network. At 2:30 p.m., Rick began his approach, driving his secondary vehicle, a nondescript sedan Terry wouldn't recognize. He activated the special recording device Oliver had provided, ensuring every word of the encounter would be captured in court-admissible quality. Rick's phone rang as he approached Terry's position. Molly's name appeared on the screen. "Honey," she said, her voice artificially concerned, "I just heard on the police scanner that there's been some kind of incident on Route 7. Please be careful driving home." "Thanks for the warning," Rick replied, his voice steady. "I'll be extra cautious." What Molly didn't know was that she'd just provided evidence of conspiracy. Her knowledge of Terry's location and timing proved her involvement in the setup. Rick rounded the bend and saw Terry's patrol car, positioned perfectly for an ambush. The corrupt cop activated his lights and pulled Rick over with predatory efficiency. "Step out," Terry yelled, approaching the car with theatrical aggression. "Get out of the vehicle now." Rick complied, his movements deliberately slow and non-threatening. He needed Terry to commit fully to the frame-up before revealing his hand. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Terry snapped handcuffs on Rick's wrists while other officers arrived. Backup Terry had called to witness his heroic drug bust. Terry searched Rick's car with exaggerated thoroughness, his body camera recording every movement. Rick knew the corrupt cop would claim to find drugs hidden in the vehicle, providing evidence of Rick's criminal activity. "Look what I found." Terry held up a bag of white powder, addressing the camera and witness officers with dramatic flair. "Mr. Frazier, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." Rick's response was calm and measured. "Officer Snyder, I think you should check that evidence more carefully." Terry's confidence faltered slightly. "What did you say?" "I said you should check your evidence," Rick repeated. "Because it's not cocaine." Terry examined the bag more closely, his face paling as he realized the white powder was simple baking soda. Rick had anticipated the plant and replaced Terry's drugs with harmless substitutes days earlier. But the real trap was yet to spring. "Daddy," Hannah's voice rang out from the patrol car's back seat, where Rick had hidden her the night before as part of his elaborate counter-operation. Terry spun around, shocked to see the 8-year-old girl emerge from his own vehicle. "What the hell? I was playing games," Hannah announced loudly, holding up her iPad. "I recorded everything." The color drained from Terry's face as he realized the implications. Hannah had been hidden in his patrol car, recording his entire operation from inside the vehicle. Every word, every action, every moment of the frame-up was captured on video from an angle that would be impossible to dispute. Rick smiled coldly as Terry reached for Hannah. "I wouldn't touch her if I were you, Officer Snyder. Not with all these witnesses watching." The other officers looked confused, unsure what was happening, but increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Rick could see them processing the implications. Why was a child in Terry's patrol car? How'd you get there? What was on that recording? "You're done, Marine," Terry snarled, desperation creeping into his voice. 20 years minimum. But his threats rang hollow. The trap had been sprung, and Terry was the one caught in its jaws. Rick's backup plan activated as FBI vehicles surrounded the scene. Oliver Farrell stepped out of an unmarked car, his badge prominently displayed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Oliver announced to the assembled officers, "you're all witnesses to a federal investigation into police corruption. Officer Snyder, you're under arrest." Terry's world collapsed in real time as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered by the jarhead he'd so thoroughly underestimated. The corrupt cop had walked into a trap so perfectly constructed that every move he made only tightened the noose around his neck. But Rick's revenge was just beginning. Chapter 4: The Unraveling. The Millbrook Police Department transformed into a federal crime scene within hours. Rick watched from Oliver Farrell's command vehicle as FBI agents systematically dismantled Terry Snyder's corruption network. Hannah's iPad video had provided the final piece of evidence needed to activate sealed federal warrants that had been prepared for months. "Your daughter's a natural operative," Oliver commented, reviewing Hannah's recording. "She got every angle, captured all the audio, and never missed a detail. Hell, she's better than half my surveillance teams." Rick felt a mixture of pride and sorrow watching his 8-year-old daughter demonstrate tactical intelligence that rivaled trained professionals. Hannah had inherited more than his instincts. She'd developed survival skills that no child should need. "She learned to read people by watching her mother lie," Rick said quietly. "Kids know when something's wrong, even when adults pretend otherwise." The federal investigation moved with military precision. Terry's apartment was raided simultaneously with the traffic stop, revealing evidence of his criminal enterprise. Cash bundles, burner phones, detailed records of bribes paid to judges and prosecutors, and photographs documenting his victims' activities. Terry hadn't just been corrupt. He'd been conducting surveillance on dozens of Millbrook residents, building blackmail material for future use. Among Terry's files, Rick discovered something that made his blood freeze. Detailed floor plans of the Fraser estate, surveillance photos of Hannah's school schedule, and a typed document titled Elimination Protocol. Terry hadn't just planned to frame Rick. He'd prepared to eliminate him permanently if the legal approach failed. "Jesus Christ," Oliver muttered, reading over Rick's shoulder. "This isn't corruption, it's domestic terrorism. How long has this bastard been planning your murder?" "Long enough to make detailed preparations," Rick replied, his voice cold as Arctic wind. "But not long enough to understand who he was targeting." The scope of Terry's criminal network shocked even federal investigators. Phone records reveal connections to organized crime families in 3 states, drug trafficking operations, and a human trafficking ring that used Millbrook as a way station. Terry's badge had provided perfect cover for criminal activities that generated over $2 million annually. But the most devastating revelation came from Terry's personal files, detailed plans to eliminate not just Rick, but eventually Hannah as well. Terry viewed Rick's daughter as a potential witness who might someday remember details that could expose his operation. The corrupt cop had already selected a foster family, criminal associates who specialized in making inconvenient children disappear permanently. Rick's hands trembled as he read Terry's notes about Hannah. Subject demonstrates unusual intelligence and observational skills. Potential long-term security risk. Recommend permanent solution after appropriate waiting period. He was going to kill my daughter, Rick said, his voice deadly quiet. Oliver had seen Rick angry before, but never like this. The Marine's calm exterior masked a rage so profound it seemed to alter the air around him. Rick, I know this is personal, but you need to let us handle this through proper channels. Proper channels? Rick laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Oliver, this man planned to murder my 8-year-old daughter. There are no proper channels for that. While federal agents processed Terry's apartment, Rick's attention turned to Molly. His wife remained at their house, unaware that her world was about to collapse. Rick's surveillance showed her frantically trying to contact Terry, growing increasingly panicked as her calls went unanswered. By evening, news of Terry's arrest had spread through Millbrook's law enforcement community. Molly finally understood something had gone catastrophically wrong with their plan. Rick watched through hidden cameras as she paced their bedroom, making desperate phone calls to criminal contacts Terry had introduced her to. "This is Molly Frazier," she said in her phone, her voice shaking. "Terry's been arrested. I need to know what that means for me." The response, captured clearly by Rick's surveillance, chilled his soul. "Mrs. Frazier, you've become a liability. We'll be in touch regarding cleanup protocols." Rick realized Molly's life was now in danger from Terry's criminal associates. Despite her betrayal, despite her willingness to participate in his destruction, she was still Hannah's mother. More importantly, she possessed information that could help federal investigators dismantle the entire network. But Rick's protective instincts warred with his desire for revenge. Molly had chosen her path, aligned herself with people who planned to murder their daughter. She deserved whatever consequences followed. His phone rang. Molly's name appeared on the screen. "Rick," she sobbed into the phone, her composure finally cracking. "Something terrible has happened. Terry's been arrested. I don't understand what's going on. Don't you?" Rick's voice was arctic. "Because I understand perfectly." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Molly slowly realized Rick knew everything. "Rick, please. I can explain." "Explain what, Molly? Explain how you helped plan my murder? Explain how you were willing to let them kill Hannah? Explain how you sold our family to criminals?" Molly's sobs intensified. "You don't understand. Terry said you were involved in illegal activities. He said you were dangerous, that Hannah needed protection. Stop lying." Rick's command cut through her hysteria. "I have recordings, Molly. Every conversation, every plan, every detail of your betrayal. I know Terry's associates are coming for you. The question is, do you want to live long enough to see Hannah grow up?" "What do you mean?" "I mean Terry's criminal friends consider you a liability now. They're planning to eliminate loose ends. You have maybe 6 hours before they make their move." Molly's panic reached new heights. "Rick, please. You have to help me. I'm sorry. I was confused. I made mistakes." "You made choices," Rick corrected. "Now you live with consequences. But I'll offer you one opportunity for redemption. Tell the FBI everything you know about Terry's operation. Every name, every location, every detail. Help them destroy the network that planned to murder our daughter. And if I cooperate, then you might live long enough to explain to Hannah why her mother tried to have her father killed." Rick ended the call, leaving Molly to contemplate her limited options. He felt no satisfaction in her terror, only cold calculation. Molly's cooperation would help federal investigators, but more importantly, it would serve Rick's ultimate purpose, ensuring that everyone who threatened his family faced complete destruction. But Terry's criminal associates weren't Rick's only concern. The corrupt cop's arrest had triggered a larger conflict. The Bassett crime family, which had protected Terry's operation, now faced exposure through his captured files. They would move aggressively to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence. Rick's war was expanding beyond personal revenge into something far more dangerous, a direct conflict with organized crime. But Frederick Frazier had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of battle. His security business provided cover for the weapons, equipment, and personnel needed to wage war against Terry's criminal network. As night fell on Millbrook, Rick made final preparations for the next phase of his operation. Terry's arrest was just the beginning. The corrupt cop's associates, the crime families that protected him, and every person who had threatened Hannah would learn why Marines never left enemies alive. Rick's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your family's debt will be paid in blood." He smiled coldly and typed his response, "Come and collect." Chapter 5. War comes to Millbrook. Rick spent the next 48 hours transforming his home into a fortress. His security business had provided perfect cover for acquiring military-grade equipment. Thermal imaging systems, motion sensors, reinforced barriers, and enough firepower to outfit a Marine squad. If Terry's criminal associates wanted war, Rick would give him a conflict they'd never forget. Oliver Farrell's FBI task force established a command post in downtown Millbrook, but Rick knew federal protection had limitations. The Bassett crime family had survived decades of law enforcement pressure by eliminating witnesses before they could testify. They wouldn't hesitate to target Hannah to silence Molly's cooperation. "We can provide protective custody," Oliver offered during a secure meeting at the safe house. "Move your family to a federal facility until the trials conclude." "No." Rick's response was immediate and non-negotiable. "I won't spend years hiding from criminals, and I won't let them believe they can threaten my daughter without consequences." Oliver studied Rick's face and recognized the determination of a warrior preparing for his final battle. "Rick, these aren't street thugs. The Bassett family has killed federal agents, judges, prosecutors. They have resources you can't imagine. So do I." Rick's first move was eliminating the immediate threat to his family. Molly had agreed to federal protection in exchange for full cooperation, but her information revealed the scope of danger facing anyone connected to Terry's arrest. The Bassett family maintained a network of assassins, corrupt officials, and criminal contacts throughout the Midwest. They could strike anywhere, anytime, using methods that would appear accidental. But Rick had advantages they didn't expect. His security business had attracted clients from military, intelligence, and law enforcement communities. These weren't random contacts. They were warriors who understood honor, loyalty, and the difference between justice and law. The first attack came at midnight on the third day. Rick's thermal sensors detected 4 figures approaching the estate through the wooded areas surrounding his property. Professional killers, moving with tactical precision, armed with suppressed weapons and explosive devices. They'd studied the property layout and planned to eliminate everyone inside before local police could respond. They'd made one crucial error, assuming Rick would fight defensively. Instead of waiting for the attack, Rick went hunting. The first assassin died without knowing his target had become his predator. Rick moved through the winter darkness like a ghost, using terrain knowledge and military skills that far exceeded his enemy's criminal training. A knife to the throat, quick and silent, before dragging the body into concealment. The second killer realized something was wrong when his partner stopped responding to radio calls. He tried to retreat, calling for backup on encrypted channels. Rick intercepted the transmission using military-grade equipment, learning the assault team's full composition and backup plans. "This is Shadow 1, the surviving assassin reported. Primary target is armed and mobile. Recommend abort and implement fallback protocols." Rick smiled coldly. Fallback protocols meant targeting Hannah's school, Molly's federal safe house, or other locations where his family might be vulnerable. But Rick had anticipated this response and prepared accordingly. "Negative on abort," came the reply. "Asset too valuable to lose. Complete the mission." The criminal organization had just made a fatal mistake, prioritizing Rick's elimination over operational security. Their determination to kill him would provide the evidence needed to destroy their entire network. Rick eliminated the remaining assassins with mechanical efficiency, then used their communications equipment to monitor the organization's response. Backup teams were converging on Millbrook from 3 directions, while coordinators prepared strikes against federal safe houses and Hannah School. But Rick had spent weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. His former Marines had quietly moved into position throughout Millbrook during the previous 48 hours. Jeremiah Stewart commanded sniper teams positioned on strategic high ground. Dave Patterson and his explosives expertise had prepared kill zones along every route into town. Oliver Farrell's federal agents provided legal cover, but Rick's warriors would do the actual fighting. The battle for Millbrook began at dawn. Bassett family reinforcements arrived expecting to overwhelm local resistance, and eliminate witness quickly. Instead, they drove into the most sophisticated ambush since Operation Iraqi Freedom. Rick's communications center provided real-time intelligence, while his sniper teams engaged targets at maximum range. Contact, contact, contact! Jeremiah's voice crackled through encrypted radios. Multiple vehicles, northwest approach. Engaging now. The first criminal convoy never made it past the town limits. Dave Patterson's improvised explosive devices disabled their vehicles while sniper fire eliminated survivors attempting to flee on foot. The message was clear. Millbrook was now a war zone, and Marines on the battlefield. The Bassett family's response escalated quickly. They called in reinforcements from other crime families, corrupt law enforcement officials, and hired mercenaries. What had begun as a simple witness elimination had become a full-scale military operation. But escalation worked in Rick's favor. Every criminal reinforcement meant more evidence of the conspiracy. Every corrupt official who participated meant additional federal charges. Every escalating action provided justification for Rick's increasingly brutal response. By noon, 15 criminals were dead. Federal agents had arrested 12 corrupt officials, and the Bassett family faced the largest organized crime investigation in Ohio history. The war they'd started to silence witnesses had instead exposed their entire operation to federal scrutiny. Rick received a call from an unknown number, the same criminal contact who'd threatened his family days earlier. Frazier, the voice was older now, tired. This ends now. You've cost us too much. Name your price for walking away. My price. Rick laughed. You threatened to kill my 8-year-old daughter. There's no price. Everyone has a price. Money, power, protection. I want bodies, Rick interrupted. Every person who planned to hurt Hannah. Every person who facilitated Terry's operation. Every person who thought they could threaten a Marine's family. I want them all dead or in federal prison. That's not negotiation. That's war. Exactly. Rick ended the call, knowing the Bassett family would interpret his refusal as weakness. They'd assume overwhelming force could still achieve their objectives. They were about to learn why Marines were called devil dogs by their enemies. The second wave arrived that evening. 30 criminals armed with military weapons, supported by corrupt police officers and hired mercenaries. They moved through Millbrook like an occupying army, prepared to kill anyone who resisted their search for Rick and his family. They'd made their final mistake. Rick's response wasn't just tactical. It was personal. These criminals had transformed his hometown into a battlefield, threatened his neighbors, and traumatized his daughter. Military justice demanded proportional response. Marine justice demanded total annihilation. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended with every criminal either dead or in federal custody. Rick's precision shooting accounted for 7 kills, but his greatest satisfaction came from capturing the operations coordinator alive. You're going to tell federal agents everything. Rick informed the wounded criminal. Every name, every location, every detail of your organization. You're going to destroy your own people to save your worthless life. Go to hell, Marine. Rick's smile was arctic cold. I've been there. Now it's your turn. Chapter 6. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. The Battle of Millbrook, as federal agents dubbed it, had destroyed the Bassett family's operational capabilities in Ohio. 23 criminals dead, 47 arrested, and evidence linking the organization to over 200 unsolved crimes. But victory carried unexpected consequences for Rick and his family. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, news crews from across the Midwest descended on Millbrook to cover the story of a former Marine who'd single-handedly dismantled a criminal empire. Rick's military record, his successful business, and his family's betrayal became national news. War hero defends family against corruption, read the headlines. But Rick knew the attention made his family more vulnerable, not less. Criminal organizations across the country now viewed him as a threat to their operations. Federal protection could only extend so far. Hannah adapted to their new reality with disturbing ease. The 8-year-old understood they were in danger and accepted security measures that would traumatize most children. She learned to identify potential threats, follow escape protocols, and operate communications equipment with military precision. "Daddy," she said one morning over breakfast, "are the bad people still coming?" "Some of them," Rick answered honestly. "But we're ready for them." Hannah nodded seriously. "Good. They shouldn't have tried to hurt us." Rick saw his own determination reflected in his daughter's green eyes and realized she'd inherited more than tactical intelligence. She developed the warrior mindset necessary for survival. Part of him felt proud. Part of him mourned the innocence she'd lost. Molly's federal debriefing revealed the true scope of Terry's criminal network. The corrupt cop hadn't just been taking bribes. He'd been recruiting other law enforcement officers, establishing cells of criminal activity in multiple states, and planning to expand into human trafficking and drug distribution. "Your wife provided crucial intelligence," Oliver reported during one of their secure meetings. "We've identified over 60 corrupt officials, 12 criminal organizations, and evidence of federal crimes dating back 15 years. She's probably saved hundreds of lives." And Terry, facing life without parole on federal charges. His cooperation won't save him. He planned to murder a child. Even criminal organizations have limits. But Rick's satisfaction was tempered by new intelligence about remaining threats. The Bassett family's destruction had created a power vacuum that other criminal organizations sought to fill. 3 separate crime families were now operating in Ohio, each viewing Rick as either a potential ally or a target for elimination. The first approach came from the Cunningham family, a Detroit-based organization seeking to expand into Ohio. Their representative, a well-dressed man named Reginald Cunningham, arrived at Rick's office with an offer of partnership. "Mr. Frazier," Cunningham said, settling into a chair across from Rick's desk, "you've demonstrated remarkable capabilities. My organization could use someone with your skills." "I'm not interested in criminal activities," Rick replied coldly. "Who said anything about crime?" Cunningham smiled. "Security consulting, protection services, intelligence gathering, all legitimate businesses. The fact that our clients sometimes operate outside conventional legal boundaries is irrelevant." Rick studied the man across from him, recognizing the predatory intelligence of a career criminal. Cunningham wasn't making an offer. He was issuing a subtle threat. "Let me be clear," Rick said, his voice carrying the authority of command. "I killed 23 of your competitors. I'll kill you just as easily if you threaten my family." Cunningham's smile faltered. "Mr. Frazier, I think you misunderstand." "No, a misunderstanding." Rick leaned forward. "You have 60 seconds to leave my office. After that, I treat you as a hostile target." The criminal left quickly, but Rick knew the encounter had established dangerous precedent. Word would spread that Frederick Frazier couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, and wouldn't tolerate any threats to his family. Some organizations would respect those boundaries. Others would view them as challenges to overcome. The second approach came from federal agencies seeking to recruit Rick's capabilities. Oliver Farrell served as intermediary for discussions about Rick joining various task forces focused on organized crime, domestic terrorism, and international security threats. "Your tactical expertise could save lives," Oliver explained. "Working with us would provide official protection for your family while utilizing your skills against legitimate targets." "Define legitimate," Rick said. "Terrorists, foreign agents, criminal organizations that threaten national security. People like Terry Snyder?" Oliver nodded. "Exactly like Terry Snyder." Rick considered the offer carefully. Federal employment would provide resources, legal protection, and official sanction for activities that currently operated in gray areas. But it would also limit his ability to protect his family using methods that exceeded government authorization. "I'll consider it," Rick said finally. "But my family comes first. Always." The third approach was the most dangerous. Criminal organizations seeking revenge for the Bassett family's destruction. These weren't business propositions or recruitment offers. They were assassination attempts designed to restore criminal prestige by eliminating the Marine who'd humiliated their operations. The first attempt came at Hannah's school. Rick's security team detected surveillance vehicles positioned around the building during school hours. The watchers weren't planning immediate attack. They were gathering intelligence about Hannah's schedule, security procedures, and potential vulnerabilities. Rick's response was swift and brutal. He tracked the surveillance team to their safe house and eliminated all 3 men with tactical precision. No warnings, no negotiations, no mercy. Anyone who targeted his daughter forfeited their right to live. But each successful defense generated new threats. Criminal organizations began viewing Rick as a high-value target whose elimination would enhance their reputations. The man who destroyed the Bassett family became a prize worth pursuing. Rick realized he was fighting a war that couldn't be won through defensive measures. Every criminal he killed generated more enemies. Every threat he eliminated created others. His family would never be safe as long as criminal organizations viewed them as profitable targets. The solution required changing the fundamental equation. Instead of defending against criminal attacks, Rick would eliminate the attackers before they could strike. Preemptive warfare, conducted with the precision and ruthlessness that had made him one of the Marine Corps' most decorated warriors. "I'm going hunting," Rick informed Oliver during their next meeting. "What does that mean?" "It means every criminal organization that threatens my family will be systematically destroyed. Not arrested, not prosecuted, eliminated. Completely and permanently." Oliver looked troubled. "Rick, that's vigilante justice. It's illegal, dangerous, and likely to get you killed." Terry Snyder was illegal. His criminal network was dangerous. And they tried to kill my daughter. Rick's voice carried the finality of absolute determination. "I gave them chances to leave us alone. Now they face consequences." Rick's transformation from defender to predator marked a new phase in his war against organized crime. He would no longer wait for criminals to threaten his family. He would hunt them down with a systematic efficiency that had made Marines feared worldwide. The hunter had become the hunted, but Frederick Frazier intended to be the last man standing when the shooting stopped. Chapter 7. The Predator Unleashed. Rick's transition from defender to hunter required resources that exceeded his security business capabilities. Fortunately, his military contacts included personnel specializing in exactly the kind of operations he now planned to conduct. Within weeks, Sentinel Solutions had quietly expanded to include former special operations personnel, intelligence specialists, and weapons experts who understood the difference between law enforcement and warfare. Jeremiah Stewart became Rick's operational commander, coordinating intelligence, gathering, and target acquisition. Dave Patterson handled logistics and equipment procurement. Oliver Farrell provided federal intelligence, while maintaining plausible deniability about Rick's more aggressive operations. Their first target was the Cunningham family in Detroit. Reginald Cunningham's business proposition had been intelligence gathering, not negotiation. His organization was already planning Hannah's kidnapping as leverage to force Rick's cooperation. "They've rented a house 12 miles from Hannah's school," Jeremiah reported during their weekly briefing. 6 men, professional kidnappers, equipped with surveillance gear and restraint equipment. They're planning to grab her during the field trip to the Science Museum next week. Rick studied the photographs of the house, noting sight lines, escape routes, and defensive positions. The criminals had chosen well: isolated location, multiple exit routes, and minimal civilian presence. Under normal circumstances, it would be an ideal base for criminal operations. But Rick wasn't planning a normal response. "How many?" Rick asked. "Total organization?" 43 known associates, 17 core family members, and connections to 3 other crime families. They generate approximately $8 million annually through drug distribution, human trafficking, and protection rackets. Assets: 12 legitimate businesses, 6 properties, and bank accounts in 4 states. Federal agencies have been trying to prosecute them for 8 years, but witnesses keep disappearing. Rick nodded. The Cunningham family represented exactly the kind of criminal organization that thrived by intimidating law enforcement and eliminating opposition. They'd calculated that threatening his daughter would force his cooperation, never considering that they'd signed their own death warrants. Operational timeline: 72 hours for complete elimination, Jeremiah replied. "Hit the safe house first. then systematically work through their hierarchy. Leave no survivors who might reorganize later. Rick approved the plan with military precision. This wouldn't be a law enforcement operation focused on arrests and prosecutions. It would be systematic elimination of hostile forces threatening his family. The assault on the safe house began at 0300 hours. Rick's team moved with special operations precision, using night vision and suppressed weapons to eliminate sentries before they could raise alarms. The 6 kidnappers died in their sleep, never knowing their intended victim's father had become their executioner. But Rick's vengeance extended beyond immediate threats. Over the following week, Cunningham family associates began disappearing. Drug dealers found dead in apparent gang violence. Money launderers discovered murdered in their homes. Criminal operatives eliminated with precision that suggested professional assassins rather than rival gang activity. Reginald Cunningham himself lasted 4 days before Rick cornered him in a Detroit parking garage. The crime boss had surrounded himself with bodyguards and electronic security, but Rick's military training made such precautions irrelevant. "You killed my people," Cunningham accused, his voice shaking despite attempts to project authority. "You threatened my daughter," Rick replied calmly. "Did you expect different consequences? This is business. You can't just murder." Rick's knife into the conversation in Cunningham's life. The crime boss died knowing that Frederick Frazier didn't distinguish between criminal threats and enemy combatants. Both faced identical fates. News of the Cunningham family's destruction spread quickly through criminal networks nationwide. Within days, Rick received messages from other organizations either offering alliance or demanding he cease operations in their territories. His response was consistent: leave his family alone or face complete annihilation. Some criminal leaders interpreted this as bluster. The Romano family from Cleveland decided Rick's reputation was exaggerated and began planning their own operations against his family. They lasted 6 days before Rick eliminated their leadership and scattered their surviving associates. But Rick's success attracted unwanted attention from law enforcement agencies investigating the sudden wave of criminal deaths across the Midwest. Federal agents couldn't directly link the killings to Rick, but the timing and precision suggested military-trained operators rather than rival gang violence. "You're starting to generate heat," Oliver warned during one of their clandestine meetings. "My superiors are asking questions about the sudden reduction in organized crime activity." "Tell them criminals are killing each other over territory disputes," Rick suggested. "That might work for a few more weeks, but eventually someone's going to connect the dots. When that happens, you'll be facing federal investigation instead of criminal threats." Rick considered this development carefully. He'd always known his war against organized crime would eventually attract law enforcement attention. The question was whether he could eliminate enough threats before federal agencies interfered with his operations. "How long do I have?" "Maybe a month before formal investigation begins. After that, you'll need to either go underground or find legal protection for your activities." Rick's solution was characteristically direct: accelerate operations to eliminate remaining threats before federal oversight became prohibitive. If law enforcement wanted to investigate him for destroying criminal organizations, they could do so after his family was safe from retaliation. The next 3 weeks became known in criminal circles as the cleansing. Rick's team systematically eliminated every organized crime figure who'd expressed interest in his family or operations. Drug dealers, human traffickers, corrupt officials, and criminal enforcers died so quickly that surviving criminals began fleeing Ohio rather than risk confronting the Marine who'd become their personal nightmare. Hannah adapted to their increasingly militarized lifestyle with disturbing ease. She learned to recognize surveillance, follow escape protocols, and communicate with Rick's security team using military terminology. Her childhood innocence had been replaced by tactical awareness that rivaled trained professionals. "Daddy," she said one evening as Rick tucked her into bed, "when will the bad people stop coming?" "Soon, sweetheart," Rick promised. "Very soon." "Good," Hannah replied seriously. "I want to go back to being a normal kid." Rick's heart clenched as he realized his 8-year-old daughter was ready to sacrifice her childhood for family security. She understood the stakes better than most adults and accepted whatever measures were necessary for survival. But Hannah's words crystallized Rick's ultimate objective, creating a world where his daughter could grow up without fear of criminal retaliation. That required more than defensive measures or tactical elimination of threats. It required fundamentally changing how criminal organizations viewed the Fraser family. Rick's final phase would send a message that transcended individual threats or specific criminal operations. It would establish a precedent so brutal and comprehensive that no future criminal would dare threaten his family again. The Predator was about to become a legend. Chapter 8. The Legend Born. Rick's final operation began with intelligence that changed everything. Oliver Farrell's federal contacts had uncovered a coordination meeting scheduled for criminal organizations across the Midwest. 7 families were gathering to discuss the Fraser problem and coordinate a unified response to his systematic elimination of their associates. They're calling it the Toledo Conference, Oliver explained, spreading surveillance photos across Rick's desk. 63 confirmed attendees, including every major crime boss between Chicago and Pittsburgh. They're planning to pool resources for one massive strike against your family. Rick studied the photographs, recognizing faces from FBI wanted posters and intelligence files. These weren't street criminals or minor operators. They were the leadership of organized crime across multiple states. Their gathering represented the largest concentration of criminal authority in decades. When and where? Tomorrow night. Warehouse complex in Toledo, chosen for isolation and security. They've hired military contractors for protection, established multiple perimeters, and planned escape routes in case of law enforcement interference. Rick smiled coldly. The criminals were preparing for a meeting that would define their future operations against his family. They'd never considered that their gathering might become their massacre. Perfect, Rick said. How many of our people can we mobilize in 24 hours? Jeremiah Stewart, who'd been reviewing tactical assessments, looked up sharply. Rick, you can't be serious. 63 targets in one location, military-grade security, backup from multiple crime families. This isn't a surgical strike. This is full-scale warfare. Exactly. Rick's determination was absolute. They're gathering to plan my family's destruction. I'm going to ensure they never have another chance. Oliver looked troubled. Rick, attacking that meeting would be mass murder. Even if you succeed, federal law enforcement would have no choice but to prosecute. This goes beyond vigilante justice into domestic terrorism. These people plan to kidnap and murder my 8-year-old daughter, Rick replied. They've forfeited any right to legal protection. Rick's team spent 18 hours planning an operation that would have challenged a military special forces unit. The warehouse complex offered limited approach routes, multiple defensive positions, and professional security that exceeded anything they'd previously encountered. Success would require precision timing, overwhelming firepower, and willingness to accept casualties. But Rick had advantages the criminals couldn't anticipate. His security business provided access to military equipment, surveillance technology, and weapon systems that exceeded most law enforcement capabilities. More importantly, his team consisted of warriors motivated by more than money. They were fighting to protect one of their own. The assault began at 2,100 hours with simultaneous strikes against the conference's security perimeters. Dave Patterson's explosive charges eliminated guard posts, while sniper teams engaged rooftop sentries. Within minutes, the warehouse complex transformed from secure meeting location to active battleground. All call signs. Rick's voice carried over encrypted communications. Time to send a message. The criminal leadership found themselves trapped in a building designed to keep law enforcement out, but equally effective at preventing escape. Rick's team moved through the complex with military precision, systematically eliminating targets while avoiding civilian casualties. Please, one crime boss begged as Rick approached his hiding position. I have family, children. So do I, Rick replied, and pulled the trigger. The Toledo conference lasted 47 minutes. When federal agents arrived, drawn by reports of sustained gunfire, they found 63 dead criminals and evidence of the most sophisticated organized crime gathering in American history. Rick's team had disappeared into the night, leaving behind only bodies and a message written in blood. This is what happens to people who threaten the Frazier family. The aftermath transformed Rick from regional threat to national legend. Criminal organizations across the country began referring to him as the Ghost, a former Marine who could eliminate entire crime families without leaving evidence for prosecution. Stories spread about his tactical capabilities, his ruthless efficiency, and his absolute dedication to protecting his daughter. More importantly, the Toledo Massacre established a precedent that fundamentally changed how organized crime viewed Rick and his family. No criminal leader was willing to risk confronting the man who'd single-handedly eliminated the Midwest's most powerful crime bosses. "Congratulations," Oliver said during their final meeting. "You've achieved something law enforcement couldn't accomplish in decades. Criminals are actually afraid to operate in Ohio." "Good," Rick replied. "That was the objective. But you realize this can't continue, right? Federal agencies are launching full investigations. Even with my protection, you'll eventually face prosecution for mass murder." Rick nodded. He'd always known his war against organized crime would have legal consequences. The question was whether those consequences mattered compared to his family's safety. "I'm retiring from active operations," Rick announced. "Sentinel Solutions will return to legitimate security consulting. My war is over." Oliver looked surprised. Just like that. Just like that. The message has been sent. Every criminal in America knows what happens to people who threaten my family. That protection is worth any legal consequences. Rick's retirement from active warfare marked the beginning of a new chapter for his family. Hannah could finally attend school without bodyguards, play with friends without security protocols, and begin recovering the childhood innocence that criminal threats had stolen. But Rick remained vigilant. His intelligence network continued monitoring potential threats, and his weapons cache remained ready for immediate deployment. He'd achieved peace through overwhelming violence, but maintaining that peace required constant preparation for war. "Daddy," Hannah said one evening as they walked through downtown Millbrook, "are we safe now?" Rick looked around at the town that had become his battlefield, noting the federal surveillance teams that still monitored his activities and the criminal informants who reported his movements to organizations considering future operations. "Yes, sweetheart," he said finally. "We're safe." And for the first time in months, Rick believed it was true. Chapter 9. The Price of Peace. 6 months after the Toledo Massacre, Rick Frazier's life had achieved the stability he'd fought so brutally to secure. Hannah attended school without security escorts, played with friends without surveillance protocols, and demonstrated the resilience that made Rick proud of her strength while mourning her lost innocence. Sentinel Solutions thrived as a legitimate security business, drawing clients who valued Rick's reputation for absolute protection. Corporate executives, federal judges, and wealthy families sought services from the man who'd proven capable of eliminating any threat to his client's safety. Rick's military precision and tactical expertise commanded premium prices, but more importantly, they provided legal cover for maintaining the resources necessary to protect his family. Oliver Farrell had successfully misdirected federal investigations away from Rick's activities. The Toledo Massacre was officially classified as a territorial war between rival crime families, with forensic evidence conveniently destroyed in a warehouse fire that eliminated potential criminal prosecution. Rick's team had vanished like ghosts, leaving only dead criminals and questions that federal agencies chose not to pursue too aggressively. "You've achieved something remarkable," Oliver commented during one of their periodic meetings. "Organized crime activity in Ohio has dropped 70% since Toledo. You've single-handedly accomplished what law enforcement couldn't achieve in decades." Rick nodded, but his satisfaction was tempered by ongoing vigilance. Peace was a temporary condition that required constant maintenance. Criminal organizations still monitored his activities, federal agencies maintained discreet surveillance, and new threats emerged regularly from unexpected directions. The first test of his new status came from an international source. The Volkov crime family, recently arrived from Eastern Europe, began establishing operations in Cleveland without realizing they were entering Rick's sphere of influence. Their initial activities, drug distribution and human trafficking, didn't directly threaten his family, but their expansion plans included eliminating potential competitors. "They're asking questions about you," Jeremiah Stewart reported during a routine briefing. Specifically, they want to know if your reputation is real or manufactured. What kind of questions? Whether you're actually capable of the things attributed to you, or if you're just benefiting from exaggerated stories. They think American criminals are weak compared to their European counterparts. Rick considered this development carefully. The Volkov family's skepticism represented exactly the kind of challenge that could destabilize the peace he'd established. Other criminal organizations were watching to see if he would respond to international threats with the same ruthlessness he'd demonstrated against domestic enemies. Arrange a meeting, Rick decided. Let's educate them about American hospitality. The meeting took place in neutral territory, a restaurant downtown Millbrook that Rick controlled through surveillance and tactical positioning. Viktor Volkov, the family patriarch, arrived with 2 bodyguards and an interpreter, clearly expecting negotiations rather than confrontation. "Mr. Fraser," Victor began through his translator, "we understand you have established certain territorial claims in this region. My organization seeks accommodation for mutually profitable activities." "What kind of activities?" Rick asked. "Import, export, financial services, entertainment venues, legitimate businesses that generate substantial revenue." Rick recognized the euphemisms: drug smuggling, money laundering, and prostitution. The Volkov family was offering to share profits in exchange for operating without interference, never realizing they were negotiating with someone who viewed their existence as a threat requiring elimination. "I have a counter-proposal," Rick said calmly. "You have 24 hours to leave Ohio. Anyone who remains after that deadline will be considered an enemy combatant." Victor's expression darkened as the translator conveyed Rick's words. "Mr. Fraser, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly. You're criminals who think geographic distance makes you immune to consequences. You're wrong." The meeting ended with Victor storming out, clearly believing Rick's reputation was exaggerated. The Russian crime boss had operated in environments where negotiations were conducted through violence and intimidation. He'd never encountered someone who viewed criminal existence as justification for immediate execution. Victor's response was swift and predictable. 3 days later, surveillance devices appeared around Rick's property and Hannah's school. Volkov operatives began gathering intelligence about family routines, security procedures, and potential vulnerabilities. They were preparing for either kidnapping or assassination, depending on which option would better demonstrate their dominance. Rick's counter-response was even swifter. The Volkov safe house in Cleveland was hit at 0200 hours by a team that moved with military precision. Suppressed weapons eliminated sentries before they could raise alarms. Explosive charges breached defensive positions, and systematic room-clearing techniques ensured no survivors remained to report the attack. Viktor Volkov himself died in his bedroom. His bodyguards eliminated seconds before Rick's knife found the crime boss's throat. The Russian's final words were in his native language, but Rick's translator provided the meaning. "This is impossible." "Nothing's impossible," Rick replied. "Some things just require proper motivation." The Volkov family's destruction sent ripples through international criminal networks. European crime families began warning their American counterparts about the Marine who killed with surgical precision, while domestic organizations used Rick's expanding reputation to justify avoiding Ohio entirely. But Rick's greatest challenge came from an unexpected source: Hannah herself. His daughter had adapted to their militarized lifestyle with disturbing ease, but her 8th birthday brought questions that Rick hadn't anticipated. Hannah was old enough to understand that other families didn't live surrounded by security systems, that other fathers didn't disappear for days on business trips that generated no visible income, and that other children didn't practice escape protocols instead of playing games. "Daddy," Hannah said one evening as Rick reviewed security reports, "why do people keep trying to hurt us?" Rick looked up from his files, studying his daughter's serious expression. Hannah had inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's tactical instincts, making her far more perceptive than most adults realized. Because some people make bad choices, Rick answered carefully. And those choices have consequences. But why do you have to be the one who gives them consequences? The question stopped Rick cold. Hannah wasn't asking about criminal threats or security measures. She was questioning the fundamental morality of his actions. His 8-year-old daughter had reached the same ethical concerns that federal agents and military commanders struggled to address. Because if I don't, they'll hurt innocent people, Rick said finally. Sometimes protecting family requires making difficult decisions. Hannah nodded solemnly, but Rick could see her processing implications that no child should need to consider. His daughter was growing up in a world where violence was normal, where death was routine, and where her father's reputation depended on his willingness to kill anyone who threatened their safety. "Understand, Daddy," Hannah said quietly, "but I wish things were different." Rick's heart clenched as he realized the full cost of his war against organized crime. He'd achieved the security he'd fought for, eliminated the threats that had endangered his family, and established a reputation that would protect them for years to come. But that victory had required sacrificing Hannah's innocence, normalizing violence, and teaching his daughter that survival depended on her father's willingness to kill. "So do I, sweetheart," Rick admitted. "So do I." That night, Rick made a decision that would define the rest of their lives. He would maintain the security infrastructure necessary to protect his family, but he would also work to give Hannah the normal childhood she deserved. No more tactical training, no more security protocols, no more exposure to the violence that had become routine in their lives. Frederick Frazier had won his war against organized crime, but the victory had cost more than he'd anticipated. Peace was possible, but only through accepting that some battles scarred the very people they were fought to protect. As Rick watched Hannah sleep, he made a final promise. No matter what future threats emerged, his daughter would never again pay the price for his enemy's mistakes. The warrior could rest, but the father's vigilance would never end. Epilogue. 2 years later, Millbrook had become known as the safest town in Ohio. Crime statistics showed remarkable improvements. Property values had soared, and federal agencies quietly credited the Frazier effect for transforming the region's criminal landscape. Rick's security business thrived, but he focused on legitimate protection services rather than offensive operations. His reputation ensured that potential criminals avoided his territory, while his wealth allowed Hannah to attend private school and pursue the normal childhood activities that had been impossible during their war years. Hannah grew into a remarkably mature young lady who understood her family's unique history, but refused to let it define her future. She excelled academically, participated in school activities, and formed friendships with children who would never know how close they'd come to living in a town controlled by organized crime. Molly served 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy charges, but her cooperation with investigators had helped dismantle criminal networks across multiple states. Upon release, she moved to California, maintaining limited contact with Hannah through supervised visits. Rick had forgiven her for practical reasons. Hannah needed to know her mother, but their marriage was permanently ended. Terry Snyder died in federal prison, killed by inmates who discovered his plans to murder a child. Rick felt no satisfaction in the corrupt cop's death, only relief that one more threat to his family had been eliminated. The legend of Frederick Frazier continued growing in criminal circles, becoming a cautionary tale about the consequences of threatening the wrong person's family. New criminal organizations entering the Midwest were briefed about the Marine who'd eliminated the region's most powerful crime families, ensuring that Rick's reputation provided ongoing protection for his daughter. As Rick watched Hannah blow out candles on her 10th birthday cake, surrounded by friends and laughter, he reflected on the price of peace. His war had cost him his marriage, his innocence, and years of normal family life. But it had also secured his daughter's future, eliminated threats that would have destroyed countless other families, and established a legacy that would protect them both for decades to come. Frederick Frazier had learned that some battles could only be won through absolute commitment to victory, regardless of cost. The warrior had found peace, but only by proving that some people were too dangerous to threaten, too prepared to defend their loved ones, and too ruthless to allow enemies to survive their mistakes. In Millbrook, Ohio, peace was more than the absence of war. It was the presence of someone willing to fight for it. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Connor Reed stood in the doorway of his modest two-bedroom apartment, watching his 17-year-old daughter, Emma, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table. Empty energy drink cans formed a small fortress around her, and highlighter marks covered every surface of her advanced placement textbooks. The girl had been pushing herself for 3 years straight, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working weekends at the local library to build her resume. "Dad, I got it," Emma whispered, her voice barely containing her excitement. The Morrison Foundation Scholarship. Full ride to Stanford. Connor felt his chest swell with pride. After the divorce 2 years ago, he lost the house, most of his savings, and had to start over as a freelance security consultant. But Emma had been his anchor, his reason to keep fighting. She'd watched him rebuild from nothing, and it had only made her more determined to succeed. "How much?" he asked, though he already knew the Morrison Foundation was prestigious. For years, everything covered. Tuition, room, board, books. $240,000. Emma's hands shook as she held up the acceptance letter. "I actually did it." Connor pulled his daughter into a fierce hug. The Morrison Foundation only awarded 5 scholarships annually to students nationwide. Emma had competed against thousands of applicants, and her combination of academic excellence, community service, and a heartbreaking essay about overcoming family hardship had put her over the top. His phone buzzed. Lisa, his ex-wife. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Connor, we need to talk about Emma's scholarship situation." Lisa's voice carried that familiar condescending tone that had poisoned their marriage. "What situation?" "She earned it. Trevor and I have been discussing this, and we think it would be better if the scholarship went to someone who really needs it. Emma can get student loans like everyone else." Connor felt ice form in his veins. Trevor Walsh was Lisa's new husband, a real estate developer who'd swooped in during their divorce proceedings. The man had money, connections, and apparently, the ability to convince Lisa that their daughter didn't deserve what she'd earned. "Lisa, Emma worked for this. She sacrificed everything. We deserve it more than her," Lisa interrupted. "Trevor's nephew is applying to Stanford next year, and his family has been through some real struggles. Not like Emma, who's had everything handed to her." "Everything handed to her?" Connor looked at Emma, who was pretending not to listen while organizing her scholarship paperwork. The girl had worked night shifts at the library, tutored younger students for extra money, and hadn't bought new clothes in over a year so she could afford application fees. "You can't just take her scholarship, Lisa." "Actually, we can. Trevor has connections on the Morrison Foundation board. He's already spoken to them about redirecting the award." "It's done, Connor." The line went dead. Emma was looking at him now, her face pale. "Dad? What did Mom mean?" Connor didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about Trevor Walsh, remembering the man's smug expression during the divorce proceedings when he'd sat behind Lisa like some kind of protector. Trevor had made subtle comments about Connor's failure as a provider, suggesting that Emma would be better off in a more stable environment. "Pack a bag," Connor told Emma. "We're going to see your mother." The drive to Lisa's new house took 45 minutes. She'd moved to Westfield Heights, an exclusive development where Trevor owned several properties. The house was a sprawling colonial that probably cost more than Connor would make in 5 years. Trevor answered the door. He was tall, soft around the middle, with the kind of artificial confidence that came from inherited wealth. "Connor, this is unexpected. We need to discuss Emma's scholarship." "Actually, we don't." Trevor stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "The decision's been made. The Morrison Foundation agrees that the scholarship should go to a more deserving candidate. More deserving than a girl who worked 3 years straight for a perfect GPA? Trevor's smile was patronizing. Connor, you wouldn't understand. This is about legacy, about families who've contributed to their communities for generations. The Walsh family has a long history with Stanford. Emma, well, she comes from a broken home. That was when Connor's military training kicked in. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger before transitioning to civilian life. He knew how to read people, how to identify weaknesses, and most importantly, how to plan operations with precision. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at Trevor for a long moment, memorizing every detail of the man's face, then turned and walked back to his car. Dad, Emma was crying now. Is it really gone? No, sweetheart. It's not gone, but we're going to have to fight for it. As they drove home, Connor was already formulating a plan. Trevor Walsh had made a critical error in judgment. He'd assumed Connor was just another defeated ex-husband who would roll over and accept injustice. But Connor wasn't just any ex-husband. He was a man who'd survived combat, who'd learned that in war, the victor wasn't always the strongest or the wealthiest. Sometimes, it was simply the one willing to go further than their enemy ever imagined possible. And Trevor Walsh had just declared war on Connor's daughter. Chapter 2: Reconnaissance and Preparation. The next morning, Connor began what he called intelligence gathering. He'd learned in the military that successful operations required understanding your enemy completely, their routines, weaknesses, connections, and most importantly, what they valued most. He started with public records. Trevor Walsh owned Walsh Development Group, a company that specialized in luxury residential projects. The business had been started by Trevor's father in the 1980s and was now worth approximately $30 million. Trevor lived off the company's profits while maintaining the image of a successful developer, though Connor's digging revealed that Trevor's actual contribution to the company was minimal. More interesting was Trevor's personal life. The man was obsessed with his reputation in Westfield Heights. He served on the country club board, hosted charity events, and had his picture in the local society pages almost weekly. His ego was massive, and his sense of superiority seemed to be built entirely on his family's money and social connections. Lisa had always been attracted to status and comfort. During their marriage, she'd constantly complained about Connor's military salary and their modest lifestyle. When Connor left the Army to start his security consulting business, Lisa had grown increasingly resentful of their financial struggles. The divorce had been swift and brutal, with Lisa claiming she deserved more than half of their assets because she'd sacrificed her career to support Connor's military service. Now she was living in Trevor's world, playing the role of the perfect socialite wife. Connor had seen her Instagram posts, charity luncheons, country club events, expensive vacations. She'd reinvented herself completely. But Connor also knew Lisa better than anyone. Beneath her new polished exterior, she was still insecure and paranoid. She craved validation and lived in constant fear of losing her newfound status. That insecurity would be useful. Emma was struggling. She'd thrown herself even deeper into her schoolwork, as if perfect grades could somehow restore her stolen scholarship. Connor watched her pushing herself to exhaustion and felt his resolve harden. Dad, I got a call from Stanford today, Emma said one evening. They said there was some kind of administrative issue with my scholarship. They wouldn't give me details, but they suggested I explore other funding options. Connor clenched his jaw. Trevor's connections were indeed powerful. What did you tell them? That I'd figure something out. But Dad, I can't afford Stanford without that scholarship. Even with loans, it's too much. You're going to Stanford, Emma. I promise you that. That night, Connor made a call to his brother Mike, who still served in Army intelligence. I need a favor. Personal or professional? Personal, but might require some creative interpretation of regulations. Mike was quiet for a moment. What do you need? Background checks on Trevor Walsh and his associates. Financial records, personal habits, anything that might be useful. And I need to know about his connections to the Morrison Foundation. Connor, you're talking about civilian surveillance. That's not something I can just. Mike, they stole my daughter's scholarship. a scholarship she earned through 3 years of perfect grades and sacrifice. They're destroying her future because they think they're entitled to it. Another pause. Send me what you have. I'll see what I can do. 3 days later, Mike delivered. Trevor Walsh was exactly what Connor had suspected. A privileged man-child who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. But there were some interesting details. Trevor had a gambling problem. He'd been making regular trips to Atlantic City, sometimes losing tens of thousands in a single weekend. He'd also been having an affair with his secretary for over 6 months, meeting her at a downtown hotel every Tuesday afternoon. More importantly, Trevor's connection to the Morrison Foundation came through his uncle, Richard Walsh, who served on the board. Richard was the one who'd pushed through the scholarship transfer to Trevor's nephew, a kid named Kyle Walsh who had mediocre grades and no real accomplishments. But the most valuable information was about Trevor's business. Walsh Development Group was leveraged heavily for a new project called Riverside Commons, a luxury apartment complex that was months behind schedule and significantly over budget. Trevor had personally guaranteed several loans, putting both the company and his personal assets at risk. Connor smiled as he reviewed the intelligence. Trevor Walsh thought he was untouchable because of his money and connections. But money and connections couldn't protect him from a man who understood warfare. The plan began to take shape. It would be complex, requiring precise timing and multiple moving parts. But when Connor was finished, Trevor Walsh would understand that some people couldn't be bullied and some fights shouldn't be started. He made another call, this time to Danny Rodriguez, a former Army Ranger who now worked as a private investigator in the city. Danny, I need to hire you for a surveillance job. What kind of surveillance? The kind that maps out someone's entire life. Every routine, every habit, every person they interact with. I need to know when they breathe. How long do you need? 2 weeks. And Danny? This is personal. Danny's voice turned serious. Someone hurt your family? They hurt Emma. Then they hurt all of us. I'll start tomorrow. As Connor hung up, he felt the familiar calm that had always preceded combat operations. The reconnaissance phase was complete. Now it was time to begin the assault. Chapter 3, The First Strike. 2 weeks of surveillance had given Connor a complete picture of Trevor's life. The man was incredibly predictable. Morning jog at 6 a.m., office by 8:30, lunch at the country club, affair with his secretary on Tuesdays, home by 7 p.m. Trevor lived his life like a man who'd never considered that someone might be watching. Connor's plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 would establish psychological pressure and make Trevor understand that his actions had consequences. Phase 2 would escalate the pressure while gathering more ammunition. Phase 3 would be the final assault that would destroy everything Trevor valued. Emma was still fighting for her scholarship through official channels, writing letters to Stanford and the Morrison Foundation. Connor encouraged her efforts while knowing they would be futile. Trevor's uncle had too much influence, and the decision had already been made in backroom conversations. But Connor had learned something important from his surveillance. Trevor's nephew Kyle, the boy who was receiving Emma's scholarship, was a senior at Westfield Prep Academy. More importantly, Kyle was heavily involved in social media and had a very public presence. Connor created several anonymous accounts and began documenting Kyle's online activities. The boy was everything Connor had expected: entitled, wasteful, and completely unaware of how privileged his life was. Kyle posted videos of himself destroying expensive items for fun, made racist and sexist comments, and bragged about getting into Stanford despite his mediocre grades. Daddy's connections are amazing. Kyle had posted just 2 days earlier. Got a full ride to Stanford, and I didn't even want to go there. Might drop out after freshman year and travel Europe instead. Connor screenshot everything. Then he began phase 1. The first strike was psychological warfare. Connor knew that Trevor's greatest weakness was his obsession with his reputation and image. So Connor decided to attack that image systematically. He started small. Anonymous tips to the IRS about Walsh Development Group's tax filings. A call to the building inspector's office expressing concerns about safety violations at the Riverside Commons construction site. An anonymous letter to the country club board suggesting they investigate Trevor's gambling debts. Each action was carefully crafted to create paranoia without revealing Connor's involvement. Trevor would know he was under attack, but wouldn't know who was attacking him or why. The gambling revelation came first. Connor had Danny photograph Trevor at the Atlantic City casino, capturing images of him losing badly at the poker tables. These photos were anonymously mailed to Lisa with a note. "Thought you should know how your husband spends your money." Lisa's reaction was immediate and violent. Connor could hear her screaming at Trevor from across the street when he drove past their house that evening. The fight lasted for hours, with Lisa threatening to leave if Trevor didn't stop gambling immediately. Next came the construction site inspection. The building inspector found multiple code violations at Riverside Commons, resulting in a stop work order that would cost Trevor hundreds of thousands in delays. The local newspaper covered the story, highlighting safety concerns and questioning Trevor's competence as a developer. But the most devastating blow came when Connor leaked Kyle's social media post to a Stanford student newspaper reporter. The story ran with the headline, "Morrison Foundation Scholarship Recipient Calls Award Daddy's Connections, Jokes About Dropping Out." The backlash was swift and brutal. The Morrison Foundation received hundreds of angry calls and emails. Stanford's admissions office launched an investigation. Most importantly, the story went viral on social media, with thousands of people expressing outrage about the scholarship system being rigged for wealthy families. Connor watched Trevor's world begin to crumble from his car, parked across from the Walsh development offices. Trevor was on the phone constantly, trying to manage the various crises. Lisa had moved back to her sister's house temporarily, taking their young son with her. The country club had quietly asked Trevor to step down from the board, pending the resolution of his gambling issues. 3 days later, the police were at their door, but not for the reasons Trevor expected. Connor had used his contacts to arrange for a thorough audit of Walsh Development Group's building permits and tax filings. The investigation revealed that Trevor had been cutting corners on safety requirements and had made several questionable deductions on his business taxes. The charges weren't serious enough for prison time, but they were public enough to destroy Trevor's reputation completely. The local news covered his arrest, and the story spread throughout Westfield Heights society. Emma watched the news coverage with confused satisfaction. "Dad, is this connected to my scholarship somehow?" Connor put his arm around his daughter. "Sometimes, sweetheart, justice finds a way." But Emma's scholarship was still gone, and Connor's plan was far from complete. Phase 1 had been about establishing dominance and making Trevor understand that he was vulnerable. Phase 2 would be about applying sustained pressure until Trevor broke completely. And Phase 3 would be about teaching Trevor Walsh that some people couldn't be bullied, and some fights came with a price higher than he'd ever imagined. Connor looked at his daughter, studying for her AP exams despite everything that had happened. Emma deserved better than the world Trevor Walsh represented. She deserved a future built on merit and hard work, not connections and corruption. Trevor Walsh had started this war when he decided to steal from a teenage girl, but Connor was going to finish it. Chapter 4: Pressure and Leverage. The arrest had been just the beginning. Connor watched from his surveillance position as Trevor's life began unraveling in ways the man had never imagined possible. The gambling story had spread throughout their social circle. The construction violations had cost him nearly $500,000 in delays and fines, and the scholarship scandal had made the Walsh family name toxic in academic circles. But Connor wasn't satisfied with public humiliation. He wanted complete destruction. Phase 2 began with Trevor's affair. Connor had Danny document every Tuesday meeting with the secretary, a woman named Jennifer Croft who was 23 and apparently unaware that Trevor was married. The affair had been going on for months, with Trevor spending company money on expensive hotels and gifts. Connor compiled the evidence carefully: photos, hotel receipts, text messages that Danny had intercepted using surveillance equipment. But instead of sending them to Lisa immediately, Connor decided to use them as leverage. He arranged a meeting with Trevor through an intermediary, a lawyer who claimed to represent an anonymous client with information about Walsh Development Group. Trevor, desperate to control the various scandals erupting around him, agreed to meet at a downtown coffee shop. Connor arrived 30 minutes early and chose a corner table where he could observe Trevor's entrance. When a man walked in, Connor was satisfied to see the toll the past weeks had taken. Trevor looked exhausted, paranoid, constantly checking his phone as if expecting more bad news. "Mr. Walsh," Connor said, standing as Trevor approached the table. Trevor froze when he recognized Connor. "You, what the hell are you doing here?" "Sit down, Trevor. We need to talk." "I'm not talking to you about anything. Whatever games you're playing." "Your affair with Jennifer Croft." Connor placed a single photograph on the table. It showed Trevor and his secretary entering the downtown Marriott. "Tuesdays at 2 p.m., room 1247. She thinks you're divorced." Trevor's face went pale. He sat down heavily, staring at the photograph. "What do you want?" "My daughter's scholarship. Return to her immediately." "I can't do that. The Morrison Foundation has already." Connor placed another photograph on the table. This one showed Trevor at the Atlantic City Casino, clearly intoxicated and losing heavily at a poker table. "Your gambling debts total $340,000. That's more than your company's liquid assets." Who are you working with?" "Nobody you need to worry about. I'm working alone, Trevor, and I'm very good at what I do." Connor leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your Uncle Richard and tell him that new information has come to light about Kyle's qualifications. You're going to recommend that the scholarship be returned to its original recipient, my daughter." "I can't do that. Kyle's already been accepted." Kyle posted on social media that he might drop out after freshman year to travel Europe. The Morrison Foundation takes that very seriously when they're investing $250,000 in a student. Trevor was sweating now. "Even if I wanted to, Richard won't listen to me. He thinks I'm a liability after all the recent publicity." Connor smiled coldly. "Then you'll have to be very persuasive. Because if Emma doesn't have her scholarship restored within 72 hours, I start releasing everything I have on you. The affair photos go to Lisa, the gambling records go to your business partners, and the tax irregularities go to federal investigators. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you an opportunity to do the right thing. Something you should have considered before you decided to steal from a 17-year-old girl." Trevor stared at the photographs for a long moment. "And if I do what you want? If I get the scholarship restored? Then you and I are done. I disappear from your life, and you never hear from me again. How do I know you won't use this information anyway?" Connor gathered the photographs and stood up. "Because unlike you, Trevor, I keep my word. Fix this, and it all goes away. Don't fix it, and I'll make sure you lose everything you've ever cared about." Trevor called him that evening. "I spoke to Richard. He's willing to reconsider the scholarship decision, but he needs documentation showing that Kyle isn't a suitable candidate. I'll have that to you within the hour." Connor had already prepared a comprehensive file documenting Kyle's social media posts, academic record, and public statements about not taking the scholarship seriously. The evidence was damning and would give Richard Walsh the cover he needed to reverse the decision without admitting corruption. But Connor had also prepared something else, a complete dossier on Richard Walsh himself. The man had his own secrets, including a series of questionable business dealings and a tendency to use his foundation position for personal benefit. Connor didn't plan to use this information unless absolutely necessary, but he believed in having backup plans. Emma was working at the library when Connor got the call from Stanford. The Morrison Foundation had contacted them about administrative errors in the scholarship allocation. Emma's award was being restored immediately, and she would receive an official apology for the confusion. Connor drove to the library and found Emma shelving books in the young adult section. When he told her the news, she dropped the books she was holding and started crying. "Dad, how did this happen? Did you do something?" Connor pulled his daughter into a hug. "I just made sure the right people knew what kind of person Kyle Walsh really is. Sometimes the truth is enough." But even as Emma celebrated, Connor wasn't finished with Trevor Walsh. The man had showed him exactly what kind of person he was, someone who would steal from a child to benefit his family. Trevor needed to understand that actions had consequences and that some people couldn't be bullied without expecting retaliation. Emma had her scholarship back, But Connor's plan had always been about more than just the scholarship. It was about teaching Trevor Walsh a lesson he would never forget. Phase 3 was about to begin. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. With Emma's scholarship restored, Connor could have walked away. His daughter's future was secure, and Trevor had been humiliated enough that he would think twice before bullying anyone else. But Connor wasn't the type of man who left jobs unfinished. Trevor Walsh had revealed himself to be the worst kind of predator, someone who used wealth and connections to take opportunities from deserving people. The scholarship theft hadn't been desperation or necessity. It had been pure entitlement. Trevor believed he had the right to take whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it. Connor decided to teach him otherwise. The trap had been months in the making. While publicly pressuring Trevor about the scholarship, Connor had been quietly working on a much larger plan. He'd used his intelligence contacts to discover that Trevor's uncle Richard had been using his position on the Morrison Foundation board to funnel money to projects that benefited the Walsh family business. The scheme was subtle but effective. Richard would recommend foundation grants to community development projects that were actually Walsh development properties. The foundation would provide low-interest loans or outright grants, allowing Trevor to develop luxury properties at a fraction of the normal cost. Connor had traced at least 4 separate instances where foundation money had been diverted to Walsh projects over the past 5 years. The total amount was nearly $2 million. Money that should have been used for scholarships and community programs. More importantly, Connor had discovered that Trevor was actively expanding this scheme. The Riverside Commons project that was currently plagued with construction delays was being partially funded by a foundation grant that Richard had pushed through just 3 months earlier. But Connor's real masterstroke involved Jennifer Croft, Trevor's secretary and mistress. Through careful investigation, Connor had learned that Jennifer wasn't just an innocent young woman being manipulated by her older boss. She was an accountant who had been helping Trevor hide the foundation money in his company's books. Jennifer had created a complex system of shell companies and false invoices that made the foundation grants appear legitimate. She was Trevor's partner in the scheme, not his victim. Connor spent 2 weeks documenting this relationship and the financial crimes involved. He photographed Jennifer accessing Trevor's company's banking systems. He recorded conversations where she discussed moving foundation money through fake accounts. He even obtained copies of fraudulent invoices that she had created. When Connor was satisfied that he had enough evidence to destroy both Trevor and Jennifer, he made his move. The plan required precise timing. Connor waited until Trevor was at his Tuesday meeting with Jennifer, then called the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "I have evidence of foundation fraud involving the Morrison Foundation and Walsh Development Group," he told the agent who answered. "Multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." "What kind of evidence?" "Bank records, recorded conversations, photographs, and documentation going back 5 years. I'm talking about $2 million in diverted charitable funds." The FBI agent took Connor's information and scheduled a meeting for the following day. Connor delivered everything he had gathered: financial records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline showing how the scheme operated. "This is comprehensive," the agent said, reviewing the files. "How did you obtain this information?" "I'm a licensed private investigator," Connor lied smoothly. "I was hired by a client who suspected irregularities in foundation grant allocations." "Who's your client?" "Attorney-client privilege. But I can tell you that this person has a legitimate interest in seeing foundation money used properly." The FBI launched their investigation immediately. Within 48 hours, they had obtained warrants for Trevor's business and personal financial records. They also began surveillance of both Trevor and Jennifer. Connor watched from across the street as federal agents executed search warrants at Walsh Development Group's offices. Trevor arrived at work that morning to find his building surrounded by law enforcement vehicles. The charges, when they came down, were devastating. Trevor and Jennifer were both arrested on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization. Richard Walsh was arrested separately for his role in the scheme, but Connor's personal satisfaction came from collateral damage. The investigation revealed not just the foundation fraud, but Trevor's gambling debts, tax evasion, and a dozen other financial crimes. The man's entire life was exposed as a web of corruption and entitlement. Lisa filed for divorce within a week of Trevor's arrest. She claimed she had no knowledge of his criminal activities and was fighting to protect her assets from federal seizure. The country club expelled Trevor from membership. His construction projects were frozen by court order. Most importantly, the Morrison Foundation was forced to undergo a complete restructuring. The scandal had exposed widespread corruption in their grant allocation process. New leadership was brought in, and they established strict oversight procedures to prevent future abuse. Emma read about Trevor's arrest in the newspaper. "Dad, this is incredible. They were stealing money from scholarships." "Some people think they're entitled to take whatever they want," Connor said. "Sometimes they need to be reminded that there are consequences." "Do you think this is connected to what happened with my scholarship?" Connor looked at his daughter, who was now excitedly planning her freshman year at Stanford. "I think justice found a way, sweetheart. It usually does." But Connor's justice wasn't finished yet. Trevor Walsh was facing federal charges that could put him in prison for 20 years. His business was destroyed, his marriage was over, and his reputation was ruined. However, Connor wanted one final meeting. There was something Trevor needed to understand about the kind of man he had chosen to cross. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Federal prison was different from what Trevor Walsh had imagined. The minimum security facility where he was being held pending trial was clean and organized, but it was still prison. Trevor's bail had been denied after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with significant offshore assets. Connor waited in the visitor's room, wearing a simple gray suit and carrying nothing but his identification. He'd requested the meeting through official channels, claiming to be a potential character witness for Trevor's sentencing hearing. When Trevor entered the room, Connor was struck by how much the man had changed. Prison had stripped away his artificial confidence, leaving behind someone who looked genuinely frightened for the first time in his life. "What are you doing here?" Trevor asked, sitting across from Connor at the metal table. "I wanted to see how you were adjusting to your new circumstances." Trevor's hands shook slightly as he clasped them together. "You did this. All of it. The scholarship was just the beginning. The scholarship was the end, Trevor. Everything else was you paying for 30 years of believing you could take whatever you wanted without consequences. I'm looking at 20 years in federal prison. My life is over." Connor leaned back in his chair. "Your life isn't over. It's just different now. You'll serve maybe 12 years with good behavior. You'll get out when you're 58, still young enough to start over." "Start over with what?" "My company's gone. My assets are frozen. My wife divorced me and took our son. I'll have nothing. You'll have what everyone else has, the opportunity to earn what you get through work and merit. No more daddy's money. No more family connections. No more stealing from children. Just you and whatever you can build with your own hands." Trevor's composure cracked. "Emma got her scholarship back. Why wasn't that enough for you?" Connor's expression didn't change. "Because you needed to understand what kind of man you decided to cross. You thought I was just another divorced dad who would roll over when someone more powerful pushed him around. You thought wrong. You destroyed my entire life over a scholarship dispute. I didn't destroy your life, Trevor. I exposed it. Everything that's happening to you now is the result of choices you made long before you met my daughter. The foundation fraud, the gambling, the affairs, the tax evasion, I didn't create any of that. I just made sure the right people found out about it." Trevor was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of man are you?" "I'm a father," Connor said simply. "And I'm the kind of man who keeps his promises. I promised Emma she was going to Stanford, and she is. I promised you that there would be consequences for trying to steal from her, and there were. The FBI said someone had been investigating our foundation grants for months. That was you. That was me being thorough. I don't do anything halfway, Trevor." Trevor looked around the visitor's room, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. "You planned all of this from the beginning. The scholarship was never really about the scholarship. The scholarship was about my daughter's future. Everything else was about teaching you a lesson. Some people can't be bullied, Trevor. Some people fight back. And some people, when they fight back, don't stop until their enemy understands exactly what they've cost themselves. Connor stood up. I want you to think about something while you're in here. Emma is going to Stanford on a scholarship she earned through 3 years of perfect grades and sacrifice. She's going to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and she's going to contribute something meaningful to the world. He paused at the door. Your nephew Kyle dropped out of Stanford after 1 semester to travel Europe, just like he said he would. The Morrison Foundation has blacklisted your entire family from future awards. Your son will have to earn his own way through life, without daddy's connections to smooth the path. You're a monster, Trevor whispered. Connor turned back. No, Trevor. I'm just a father who loves his daughter more than you loved yours. The difference is, I was willing to do whatever it took to protect her future. You were willing to steal it for your own family's benefit. Connor left the prison and drove home to his modest apartment. Emma was at the kitchen table again, but this time she was working on Stanford orientation materials instead of scholarship applications. How was work, Dad? She asked without looking up. Good. Very good. Everything worked out exactly the way it should have. Emma smiled and went back to her paperwork. She was planning her class schedule, researching professors, and preparing for the life she had earned through her own determination and sacrifice. Connor watched her for a moment, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Trevor Walsh would serve his time and hopefully learn something about the difference between earning success and stealing it. But more importantly, Emma would get the future she deserved. And Connor had kept his promise. Some fights were worth whatever they cost. Some principles were worth defending regardless of the consequences. And some people, when they threatened what you loved most, needed to be reminded that there were still people in the world who couldn't be bullied. Trevor Walsh had learned that lesson. Connor hoped it would serve him well during the long years ahead. Chapter 7. The Final Truth. 3 months after Trevor's sentencing to 15 years in federal prison, Connor received an unexpected visitor. Lisa stood at his apartment door, looking older and more defeated than he'd seen her even during their divorce. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Connor let her in, curious about what could have brought his ex-wife to his doorstep. She'd been publicly claiming complete ignorance of Trevor's crimes, painting herself as another victim of his deception. I know it was you, Lisa said once they were seated in Connor's small living room. The whole thing. Trevor's arrest, the Foundation investigation, all of it. Connor didn't respond immediately. What makes you think that? Because I know you. When someone hurts Emma, you don't just get angry, you get even. And you don't stop until you've won completely. Lisa looked around the modest apartment, taking in the simple furniture and basic amenities. I also know you're capable of planning something like this. The military taught you to think strategically, to gather intelligence, to execute complex operations. Trevor was a criminal. Lisa, the FBI found evidence of fraud going back years. Evidence that someone led them to. Evidence that someone had been carefully collecting and organizing. Lisa met his eyes. How long did you plan this? Connor considered his answer. There was no point in lying now. From the moment Trevor told me that you deserved Emma's scholarship more than she did. Before the arrest, before the investigation, I started gathering information the day after Trevor stole Emma's scholarship. The foundation fraud was real, Lisa. I just made sure the right people knew about it. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Trevor says you destroyed his life. Trevor destroyed his own life. I just exposed what he'd been hiding. But you did it deliberately. You planned to ruin him from the beginning. Connor nodded. Yes, I did. Lisa looked at him with something between fear and fascination. You're not the same man I married. No, I'm not. The man you married would have accepted what Trevor did and try to work within the system. Would have believed that good people eventually get rewarded and bad people eventually get punished. And now I know better. Sometimes good people get crushed by people with more money and power. Sometimes bad people win because nobody's willing to fight them properly. Sometimes justice needs help. Lisa stood up and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. Do you know what the worst part is? Part of me admires what you did. Trevor was a bully and a thief. He deserved what happened to him. But you scared me, Connor. The man who could plan and execute something like this. That's not someone I want to be around. Connor understood. The person he'd become in order to protect Emma wasn't someone most people would be comfortable knowing. He'd crossed lines that normal people didn't cross, used skills that normal people didn't have. Emma doesn't know, does she? Lisa asked. Emma knows that justice was done. She doesn't need to know how. And me? What happens to me now? Connor looked at his ex-wife, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. You go on with your life. You find someone else to provide the lifestyle you want. You stay away from Emma and me unless it's absolutely necessary. That's it. After everything that's happened. What did you expect, Lisa? You chose Trevor over our daughter. You stood by while he stole her scholarship. You only care about what happened because you got caught up in the consequences. Lisa's face flushed with anger. I didn't know about the foundation fraud. I thought Trevor was just using his connections to help his nephew. And that was fine with you? Taking a scholarship away from a girl who earned it and giving it to a boy who didn't. I thought it would be better for Emma in the long run. Trevor's family had money and influence. They could have helped her later. Connor stood up. This conversation is over. Lisa, you made your choice when you decided that Trevor's family deserved Emma's scholarship more than Emma did. You live with the consequences. What if I had fought him? What if I had told him no? Then Emma would have kept her scholarship. Trevor would probably still be stealing from the foundation, and you'd still be married to a criminal who just hadn't been caught yet. Lisa moved toward the door. I was scared, Connor. Trevor had money and lawyers and connections. I didn't think I could fight him. I was scared too, Lisa. Scared that my daughter's future was being stolen by people who thought they were entitled to take it. The difference is I fought anyway. After Lisa left, Connor sat in his quiet apartment and thought about the choices that had led to this moment. He'd become someone who was capable of destroying another person's life with careful planning and ruthless execution. That wasn't who he'd been when he married Lisa, or even when he'd left the military. But it was who he'd needed to become to protect Emma. Emma came home from her part-time job at the library that evening, excited about orientation week at Stanford. She was leaving for California in 2 weeks, and Connor was helping her plan what to pack. Dad, I got an email from my academic advisor. She said the Morrison Foundation wants to feature me in their newsletter as an example of scholarship recipients who overcome adversity. Connor smiled. That's wonderful, sweetheart. She asked if I wanted to write about what the scholarship means to me, about how it represents opportunity and merit triumphing over obstacles. What did you tell her? That I'd love to write something, that the scholarship represents everything I believe about working hard and earning what you get. Emma paused, looking at her father carefully. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Trevor Walsh was really guilty of all those crimes? It seems like such a coincidence that he got arrested right after the scholarship got restored. Connor met his daughter's eyes. I think Trevor Walsh was the kind of man who believed he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. And I think he was wrong. Emma nodded slowly. Good. Because for a while there, I was starting to think that maybe the world really was rigged for people like him. That maybe hard work didn't really matter. Hard work always matters, Emma. Sometimes it just needs help. Emma hugged her father tightly. I love you, Dad. Thank you for believing in me. I love you too, sweetheart. Always. As Emma went to her room to work on her scholarship essay, Connor reflected on what he'd learned about himself over the past year. He discovered that he was capable of planning and executing operations that would destroy another person's life. He learned that he could cross moral and legal lines when protecting someone he loved. But most importantly, he learned that some fights were worth whatever they cost. Emma was going to Stanford because she'd earned it, not because someone had given it to her out of pity or obligation. She would succeed in life based on her own merit and determination. Trevor Walsh would spend the next 12 to 15 years in federal prison, learning what it meant to have your choices limited by other people's decisions. Maybe he would emerge as a better person. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, Connor had kept his promise. Emma was going to Stanford, and Trevor Walsh understood exactly what kind of man he'd chosen to cross. Justice, Connor had learned, wasn't always pretty, but sometimes it was necessary. Chapter 8, Stanford and New Beginnings. Stanford University's campus in August was everything Emma had dreamed of during those long nights studying for perfect grades. Red-tiled roofs, palm trees, and the kind of academic atmosphere that seemed to promise unlimited possibilities. Connor helped her move into her dorm room, watching his daughter transform from the exhausted teenager who'd nearly lost everything to a confident young woman ready to take on the world. "Dad, this is incredible," Emma said, looking out her dorm window at the sprawling campus. "I can't believe I'm actually here." Connor felt a deep satisfaction watching Emma settle into her new life. The girl who'd worked night shifts at the library to pay for college application fees was now surrounded by the resources and opportunities that came with attending one of the world's premier universities. During orientation week, Connor met other parents and heard their stories. Many were wealthy professionals who'd saved for years to afford Stanford's tuition. Others were middle-class families making significant sacrifices. A few, like Connor, were there because their children had earned full scholarships. "Your daughter must be exceptional," said Dr. Patricia Kim, another parent whose son had received a partial scholarship. "The Morrison Foundation is incredibly selective." "She worked for it," Connor replied simply. "Still, she's lucky the scholarship went to the right person." "I heard there was some controversy earlier this year about a student who wasn't qualified receiving the award." Connor nodded. "I heard that too. Apparently, the foundation discovered the student had questionable qualifications and was using family connections instead of merit. Well, I'm glad they caught it. Scholarships should go to students who've earned them." That evening, Connor had dinner with Emma at a restaurant near campus. She was glowing with excitement about her classes, her professors, and her fellow students. "Dad, I met my faculty advisor today. Professor Martinez teaches constitutional law, and she said I have the academic foundation to consider law school after my undergraduate degree." "Is that what you want to do?" "I think so. I want to help people who can't help themselves. Maybe work in civil rights or family law." Connor smiled, thinking about how perfectly that career choice fit his daughter's character. Emma had always been driven by a desire to see fairness and justice prevail. "There's something else," Emma said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Professor Martinez asked about my background, about what motivated me to work so hard in high school." "What did you tell her?" "I told her about the divorce, about how we had to start over with nothing, about working at the library and studying constantly because I knew education was my only path to a better life." Emma paused, playing with her food. "But I didn't tell her about what happened with the scholarship, about Trevor stealing it and then getting arrested. I didn't know how to explain all that." "You don't need to explain it, sweetheart. That's not your story to tell. Your story is that you worked hard, earned a scholarship, and now you're at Stanford pursuing your dreams." "But it feels like I'm leaving out something important. Like there's this whole part of what happened that I don't understand." Connor reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Emma, there are some things in life that adults handle so that young people can focus on their futures. What happened with Trevor Walsh was one of those things. Did you have something to do with his arrest?" Connor looked at his daughter, seeing the intelligence and perceptiveness that had always made her special. She was old enough to understand complex moral questions, but she was also about to start a new life that shouldn't be shadowed by the darker aspects of justice. "I made sure the right people knew the truth about Trevor Walsh," Connor said carefully. "I didn't create his crimes, but I did make sure they were discovered." Emma nodded slowly. "Because he tried to steal my scholarship. Because he tried to steal your future. And because I promised you that you were going to Stanford." "Was it legal?" "What you did. Mostly. And when it wasn't, it was necessary." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Are you proud of what you did?" "I'm proud that you're here, earning your degree based on merit and hard work. I'm proud that Trevor Walsh learned there are consequences for bullying people. And I'm proud that the Morrison Foundation cleaned up their grant process so this can't happen to other students. Were you proud of the methods you used?" Connor considered the question carefully. "I'm proud that I was willing to do whatever it took to protect your future. Whether that makes me a good person or a bad person, I guess that's for other people to judge." Emma squeezed her father's hand. "It makes you my dad, and that's all I need to know." They finished dinner and walked around the Stanford campus as the sun set. Emma pointed out the library where she planned to spend most of her time, the dormitory where she'd made her first college friends, and the building where she'd have her first constitutional law class. "Dad, I have one more question. What's that? Trevor's in prison for 15 years. That seems like a long time for scholarship fraud. Trevor wasn't just guilty of scholarship fraud, Emma. The FBI found evidence that he'd been stealing from the Morrison Foundation for years. Money that should have gone to students like you went to his family's business projects instead. How much money? Nearly $2 million over 5 years. Money that could have funded dozens of scholarships for deserving students. Emma stopped walking. He stole money from dozens of students. He stole opportunities, dreams, futures. The scholarship he took from you was just the latest in a long series of thefts. So, when you made sure he got caught, I was protecting more than just your scholarship, Emma. I was protecting every future student who deserved a fair chance at those opportunities. Emma looked up at the Stanford clock tower, visible in the distance. Then I'm glad you did what you did, even if it was scary and complicated. Justice usually is, sweetheart. The next morning, Connor prepared to return home. Emma was settled in her dorm, registered for classes, and ready to begin her college career. As he packed his suitcase, Connor reflected on how much his life had changed over the past year. He discovered capabilities he didn't know he possessed. He'd crossed moral and legal lines that he'd never imagined crossing. He'd become someone who was capable of destroying another person's life through careful planning and execution. But he'd also kept his promise to his daughter. Emma was at Stanford, pursuing her dreams, surrounded by opportunities she'd earned through her own merit and determination. "Dad," Emma said, appearing in his hotel room doorway. "Before you leave, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I know that what you did for me, it changed you, made you into someone harder and more dangerous than you were before." Connor started to protest, but Emma held up her hand. "And I want you to know that I understand why you did it. And I love you for being willing to become that person to protect my future." Emma hugged her father tightly. "But I also want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that you'll try to find your way back to being the person you were before all this started. The person who taught me that good people eventually get rewarded and bad people eventually get punished." Connor held his daughter close, feeling the weight of what she was asking. "I'll try, Emma. I promise I'll try." As Connor drove away from Stanford, he thought about Emma's request. She was asking him to find his way back to being someone who believed in justice without having to create it personally. Someone who trusted systems and institutions to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. It would be difficult. The past year had taught him too much about how the world really worked, about how people with money and connections could take whatever they wanted until someone stopped them. But for Emma, he would try. Because the girl who was now studying at Stanford on a scholarship she'd earned deserved to live in a world where her father wasn't always ready for war. Even if Connor could never completely return to the person he'd been before Trevor Walsh, he could try to become someone worthy of the daughter he'd fought so hard to protect. Chapter 9. The Price of Protection. 5 years later, Connor stood in the audience at Stanford Law School's graduation ceremony, watching Emma walk across the stage to receive her JD degree. She'd graduated summa cum laude, earned a position at a prestigious civil rights law firm, and was already planning to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The girl who'd almost lost her scholarship to Trevor Walsh's entitlement had become exactly what Connor had hoped, a woman who would make the world more just through her own efforts and abilities. "Congratulations, counselor," Connor said when Emma found him after the ceremony. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." They had dinner that evening at the same restaurant where they'd talked during Emma's freshman orientation. Emma was glowing with pride and excitement about her future, but Connor could see deeper questions in her eyes. "Dad, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for a long time?" "Of course. Do you ever regret what you did to Trevor Walsh?" Connor considered the question carefully. In the 5 years since Trevor's arrest, Connor had occasionally wondered the same thing. Trevor was still in federal prison, serving what would ultimately be a 12-year sentence. His life had been completely destroyed, his business gone, his marriage ended, his reputation ruined. "I regret that it was necessary," Connor said finally. "I regret that the world is a place where someone like Trevor Walsh could steal opportunities from people like you without consequences. But do you regret stopping him?" "No, I don't regret protecting your future." Emma nodded. I've been thinking about this a lot as I studied law, about justice and revenge and the difference between them. What conclusion did you reach? That sometimes they're the same thing. And sometimes good people have to do hard things to protect what matters most. Emma reached across the table and took her father's hand. I also concluded that I was lucky to have a father who was willing to become someone dangerous to protect me. Connor felt a complex mix of pride and sadness. He was proud that Emma understood the choices he'd made, but sad that she'd had to learn such harsh lessons about how the world worked. There's something else I need to tell you, Emma continued. I got a letter last month from Trevor Walsh. Connor's expression hardened. What did he want? To apologize. To me, not to you. He said he'd spent 5 years in prison thinking about what he'd done, and he wanted me to know that he understood he'd tried to steal something I'd earned. What did you do with the letter? I wrote back. I told him that his apology was appreciated, but not necessary. That I hoped he'd learn something about earning success instead of taking it. Emma paused. I also told him that my father had taught me that people who try to steal from children should expect consequences. Connor smiled at that. What did he say to that? He wrote back one more time. He said he understood why you did what you did, and that if he had a daughter, he hoped you would have been brave enough to fight for her the way you fought for me. Do you believe him? I think prison changed him. Whether it made him a better person or just a more careful person, I don't know. But I think he understands now that actions have consequences. They finished dinner and walked through Stanford's campus one last time before Emma's new life began. She would start work at her law firm the following month, focusing on cases involving educational access and civil rights. Dad, I have one more question. What's that? Are you happy with how everything turned out? Connor looked at his daughter. Brilliant, accomplished, ready to make the world better through her own efforts. Emma, I'm prouder of you than I've ever been of anything in my life. You earned everything you've achieved, and you're going to help people who need help. But are you happy? Connor considered the question. The past 5 years have been complicated. He'd built a successful security consulting business, but he'd never remarried or formed serious relationships. The person he'd become to protect Emma wasn't someone most people were comfortable being around. He'd stayed in touch with some of his military friends, but found that civilian life felt different now. He understood too much about how power really worked, about how people with wealth and connections could take whatever they wanted until someone stopped them. I'm satisfied, Connor said finally. I kept my promise to you, and justice was done. That's enough. Emma stopped walking and turned to face her father. Dad, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that you'll try to find some happiness for yourself. You protected my future, but you deserve a future too. Connor looked at his daughter, seeing the concern in her eyes. She understood that protecting her had cost him something essential, some fundamental belief in the goodness of people and systems. I'll try, Emma. Promise me you'll really try. Maybe start dating again. Maybe trust someone enough to let them get close to you. I promise I'll try. They hugged goodbye the next morning. Emma was driving to Los Angeles to start her new job, and Connor was flying back to his apartment and his security consulting business. On the plane, Connor thought about Emma's questions about happiness and the future. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure who he was anymore outside of being Emma's father and protector. The person he'd been before Trevor Walsh felt like someone from a very long time ago. But Emma was right that he deserved some kind of future beyond just the satisfaction of having protected hers. Maybe it was time to try building something new, something that wasn't defined by the need to fight for what was right. When Connor got home, he found a package waiting at his door. Inside was a graduation photo of Emma in her cap and gown, along with a note. Dad, thank you for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for, and that good people don't always win unless someone helps them. Thank you for being willing to become someone dangerous to protect what was right. And thank you for showing me that love sometimes means being willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, Emma. Connor put the photo on his kitchen table and looked around his modest apartment. 4 or 5 years. This had been enough. A base of operations for the man who destroyed Trevor Walsh and protected his daughter's future. Maybe it was time to see if it could become something more. Maybe it was time to see if the person who'd been willing to cross any line to protect Emma could learn to build something positive for himself. Connor picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There were several women he'd met through his business who'd expressed interest in getting to know him better. He'd always deflected these advances, unwilling to let anyone get close enough to see what he'd become. But Emma was right. He deserved some kind of happiness beyond just the satisfaction of justice done. Connor selected a contact and typed a text. "Hi, Sarah. This is Connor Reed. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime this week." He sent the message before he could change his mind. Whatever happened next, at least he was trying to honor his promise to Emma. Outside his window, the sun was setting over a world that was slightly more just because Connor Reed had been willing to do whatever it took to protect his daughter's future. Trevor Walsh was in federal prison. The Morrison Foundation had cleaned up their grant process, and Emma was beginning her career as a civil rights attorney. Justice, Connor had learned, wasn't always pretty, but sometimes it was necessary. And sometimes, when the fight was over, it was possible to try building something new from what remained. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.